Flip to page 335 in your textbook. We're going to learn about the Middle Ages through the Ottoman Empire.
Can I read something interesting?
On the first page, it says that there's a video that talks about it more in depth. Can we do that?
Yes, but you have to take note of the things that interest you and make 5 main points.
Oh my god. So,
Hi, today we'll be talking about the 12th through the 16th century. We'll first begin with the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages was a time of many government and cultural changes until one system was decided, known as feudalism. Feudalism derives from the Latin word fief, which is land given to a vassal by a lord in return for military service. The point of a vassal was to gain money for a lord so he could have a body of armed knights.
It was possible for a vassal to owe allegiance to more than one lord. This happened so a vassal could improve their situation by gaining another fief, which was a great form of wealth. Feudal relationships were considered very complex because everyone owed primary allegiance to the king. He then distributed land to the nobility. The nobility distributed his land to the lords, until finally the people living on the fiefs were vassals of the fief holder. In the late medieval period, the fiefdom often became hereditary. The son of the knight or lesser nobleman would inherit the land and the military duties from his father upon the father's death. Feudalism had two enormous effects on medieval society. First, it discouraged unified government. The feudal government was always arranged between individuals, not between nation-states and citizens. No sense of loyalty to the geographic area or particular race. Only loyalty to a person, which would end upon that person's death. It also discouraged trade and economic growth. Serfs were tied to individual plots of land and forbidden to move or exchange occupations without permission from their lord. The Middle Ages government was the Great Council, which included high-ranking barons and such top officials as archbishops. The representatives from the lower levels of the aristocracy and from cities and towns also attended. The model parliament included representatives from all the important classes of the day. The large class of people not representative were the serfs and free peasants, which were not considered important enough to be included. There were two important principles that were accepted by the time about the parliament. Only the parliament could repeal a law that it had passed. No taxes could be established and collected without the parliament's approval. And parliament, along with the king, was now an important part of the centralized English government.
a century has gone by and a new form of government has taken place. The Renaissance were actively involved in running the business of public life. There were more than 20 city-states in Italy, with each carrying out a different function of the government. Riches were acquired through trade and conquest. Wealthy families would use money to gain and employ artists, musicians, scholars, and elaborate places such as churches and public buildings. Bankers such as the Medici family accumulated great wealth.
The Medici family accumulated great fortunes by trading and charging fees for their services. Cosimo de' Medici helped Florence become a dynamic Renaissance center for trade and culture. He was said to have earned $4 million through his international banking role, which was a huge sum of money for that era. Renaissance states had two basic forms of government, princedoms and monarchies, which the Renaissance called republics. Princedoms were where a prince was an individual called whether duke, count, or just lord ruled a state usually with the support of his family. The monarchy was a princedom sanctioned by a much larger tradition, stronger institutions, and greater claims of legitimacy for its rulers. The merchant class created a system of government through interlocking and balanced councils. The system of balanced and diffused power ensured that no individual or family could control the city. It was a government of balanced power and mutual suspicion. This system was the same yet different from Parliament because this system was based off no individual being able to govern themselves or other people. Merchant aristocracies maintained political power through labor organization called guilds. Florence guild members could serve on the primary governing body called the Signora. Not everyone who wanted to belong to a guild was allowed to join one. Each guild was an arm of a particular profession: law, banking, wool, manufacture, baking, and had its own requirement for admission. Many guilds denied membership to those who couldn't read or write. This, in a way, was like the feudal system and their different classes of occupation. As time moves on, the government began to change into a version of what it once was.
The Ottoman Empire was a centralized regime ruled by the Sultan. Mehmed had to change the tax systems from his predecessors because the amount could not supply for the required resources. The taxes taken in went from the taxpayer to the holders in return for military and administrative services. Mehmed began to withdraw the coinage to replace with new coins of different metals. This was called coin debasement, which was the cause for the inflation of the Ottoman Empire. This system led to considerable abuses and unfair tax burdens that were placed on the people who were poor and peasants who lacked the resources or power to be able to avoid payment or buy off tax collectors. Also, much like the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, in remote provinces, local families or officials were the source of power. The Ottomans never developed a legal procedure for accession, and this was to be a source of instability and weakness. The first sultans were among the most able sons of the sultan. Most of the time, brothers were rivals and sometimes executed. By the 1600s, the oldest male members of the family were selected as sultans. The sultanate passed among brothers or nephews, and other possible heirs were kept under house arrest in various places. The sultan granted pieces of land to loyal soldiers and conquerors that served them. The land was held by that man until death, but once he was dead, his family was soon dirt poor again. Members of the family had to re-earn the land that was once theirs. This kept the sultan powerful and didn't allow wealthy families to build themselves up to the point where they could overthrow the sultan. It also struck a sense of hard work equals great reward into the hearts of their citizens.
Now you have a more in-depth understanding of the governmental changes throughout the 12th through 16th centuries.
What all began as the Middle Ages fiefdom transformed into people having more freedom, independence, and control while keeping the core values and strengths of each government.